Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're kicking off our new year with new data. Today's webinar, Power Your Workflows with the Living Atlas, will focus on our newly added American Community Survey data layers. In this webinar, we'll explore the capabilities of the ACS layers, introduce common workflow scenarios, and learn how to make a web map using the newest released demographic data available. These layers cover topics such as basic population characteristics, housing, education, poverty, homeownership, employment, and many more that you can use as is or customize for your specific needs. This is the first webinar installation of the 2019 Spatial Data webinar series. The webinar will be recorded and shared with you. I am your host, Carissa Schrader. I have recently joined Esri's product marketing team to help connect you with the authoritative content available through Esri's data and location services offerings. I am joined here today with guests Diana Lavery and Lisa Berry. Diana and Lisa are cartographic product engineers on the ArcGIS Living Atlas of the World team. The duo will share their expertise on the American Community Survey and walk us through two great demos to help you get started using the layers. We will kick things off today with a poll question to help us get more familiar with your experience using ACS data and Living Atlas layers. Then I will hand things over to Lisa and Diana for a brief overview of the Living Atlas and the American Community Survey. Diana will introduce us to the ACS data layers and where we can easily discover the different variables available within the Living Atlas. We'll also feature two demos today. The first demo will help to answer the questions of what, where, and why. The second demo will focus on customizing an ACS web map in minutes. We will reserve time to answer questions at the end of the webinar. Please feel free to utilize the chat options to ask your questions, and we'll address topics as timing permits. Resources are also available in the webinar window. Please use the PDF provided to access links to the material discussed today. Now, for our first poll question. Are you familiar with the American Community Survey data from the U.S. Census Bureau? Go ahead and click your response. I'll share the results with the group, and we'll go ahead and tailor our conversation based on that. Okay, it looks like 53% have used it before, but not often. So it looks like we do have some great experience in using the ACS data from the U.S. Census Bureau. Our next question. Have you ever worked with Living Atlas layers before when making web maps? Again, go ahead and click your response. I'll share the results with the group. Great. So it looks like we have an even group here. So some of you have used the Living Atlas layers once or twice for using web maps or making web maps. And some of you have not done this before or perhaps have not heard of the Living Atlas at all. So we'll definitely walk through that today. And I want to thank you for participating. Now let's get started by learning about the Living Atlas and the American Community Survey. Lisa, would you like to start by kicking things off?
Thanks, Carissa. So to get started, I'll give you an introduction about what the Living Atlas of the World is. This is a part of the full ArcGIS platform that helps you get started in your GIS workflows by offering you ready-to-use data at your fingertips. Essentially, the value of this is that instead of having to follow normal data gathering procedures, going to a website, finding data, downloading it, processing it, getting it into the right format, the Living Atlas really just kickstarts all of your processes by offering you data that's just at your fingertips, built into the product. And so this is great because there's data layers, there's maps that you can use within your apps, and there's apps that you can either use directly or to just gain inspiration from. The Living Atlas is categorized so that as you're using it throughout the product, you can easily search and browse things. There's categories such as ready-to-use base maps. There's different types of imagery. There's boundaries that are available that you can use to just get started with your workflows. There's data in the people category, which is what we'll be showing you today. That's anything that has to do with demographics, housing, whatnot. And there's also categories such as infrastructure and environment, which are really useful within many GIS workflows. What's really valuable about the data that's within the Living Atlas is that it's all been vetted. Anything that's there has gone through a curation process, which means that it comes from an authoritative data source, it is well documented, and it's of high quality. So there's nothing that's in the Living Atlas that's going to have test or demo or someone's halfway processed data. This is really reliable data that you can just up and use and have trust when you access it. You can feel free to use data within the Living Atlas directly within a brand new map, or you can layer it within your existing maps in order to really expand the maps that you already are using and working with. Some examples that you see here, we have live services such as the World Traffic Services. There's also recent hurricanes, there's weather, there's wildfire activity, and there's right here you see the USA telephone area codes. There's lots of different boundaries like that. We have boundaries from the census, we have boundaries from lots of different government organizations, and we also have things like terrain models, DEMs, and all sorts of different types of imagery. And so a lot of these come from reliable sources such as NOAA or USGS or Census. And so on that topic, that's kind of a segue into what we're showing today, which is the American Community Survey, which Diana is going to give you a little bit more information about. Diana?
Thanks, Lisa. Yes, American Community Survey, I'm sure you guys have heard of it. It looked like that in the poll. It's the biggest program other than the decennial census that the Census Bureau does. It's an ongoing survey of population, households, and even housing units. They summarize all these survey questions up to various geography levels, such as state, county, and tract, and produce about 1,000 or more tables of these demographic estimates. They've got the 1-year estimates and 5-year estimates. What's great about the 5-year estimates is that they're pooled across 5 years worth of survey data. So we get a really great sample size, which is more statistically reliable, and that is what allows us to get data at such fine-grained geography levels, such as small counties and tracts.
Diana, real quick, I've read that the ACS determines how $675 billion in federal and state spending is distributed each year. That's an incredible statistic. It sounds like a lot of people use this data to make really important decisions.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of state and local government agencies will look to this data to distribute different funds that they'll have for various community programs, and definitely at the federal level as well.
Wow.
Yeah. So you may be thinking, okay, I've heard demographic and population stuff, but what fields am I going to expect to see? There's tons of information about journey to work, such as commute times, commute modes, all kinds of different income variables, education level, employment status, whether or not you're looking for work or not in the labor force, poverty by age, we've got stuff on veterans, and most recently, they've added computer ownership and internet connectivity. So there's a whole treasure trove of information here that the ACS covers. If you've ever built a web map before with ACS data, you'll know that it's a pretty cumbersome process. You have to download the census data or the ACS data from the census website, then join it to a geography file and hope that your leading zeros don't mess you up along the way. And then you've got to publish it to the web and hope that that goes well. And then finally, you can make those web maps that you'll see in the right-hand side of your screen. Once you do that, new data comes out every year. So your web maps now are out of date. You'll need to repeat this process every year. However, now that we've got a whole bunch of ACS data in the Living Atlas, it'll be refreshed every year, updated annually within days of the census releasing the new estimates. And this data comes straight from the Census API. We've got it for state, county, and tract. And once again, we're using the 5-year estimates so that we get more reliable data and we're able to map it all the way down to the tract level. It's already joined to really nice boundaries that are cartographically beautiful. Lisa took the time to clip out the water so that you won't see the international borders along the Great Lakes, for example.
Yeah, and you can see coastlines and rivers, and especially at the tract level, you'll see a lot of detail that otherwise you wouldn't see, major rivers that, it turns out rivers go through a city, and those are an important part of how the geography is based in that area. So yeah, we went ahead and clipped these for all geographies so that they look cleaner, but they're still using census inputs, and so you can still trust that these are all tiger boundaries being used in those boundaries.
Exactly. And like I said, there's over 1,000 ACS tables. We've chosen about 75 of the most popular ACS tables, and we've grouped them into various topics. So you won't have to get 10 different tables if you're interested in home ownership by race, for example. We've already grouped those together. We've also done a lot of other cool value-added things that I'm going to turn it over to Lisa to describe.
Thanks, Anna. So another thing that is included in these is that because we have them all the data at state, county, and tract level, this data at each geography is available for the full, all 50 United States, as well as Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. So you know that as you're accessing this data, you're really getting the full breadth of the data that's from the Census API. Another value add that we've done is that for each topic, each layer topic, we offer it as both boundaries and centroids. We know that some people like to make traditional choropleth map. They like to use the boundaries within their mapping and analysis. But in some cases, centroids are more valuable for either performance or for spatial aggregation and other reasons that we actually have covered in a document that we'll share later that we've created. If you want to learn more about the differentiation between those two different versions of each topic. But those are the exact same data values in them. They're just broken into two different services, so you can choose which ones you'd like to access. Another thing that we've done is we've pre-calculated percentage values for many important fields that are within these services. A lot of times, if you want to look at the count of the population who speaks Spanish, you'd actually want to know the percentage, but you want to make sure that you divide by the correct denominator when calculating those. And so Diana's our in-house ACS expert, and she's actually created a huge amount of these pre-calculated percentage values in these data sets that contain the correct denominators used within them. Those percentages also include the margins of error, which uses the ACS calculation for calculating margins of error. So if you use one of those percentages, you also can use the margin of error, which you can have trust in that uses the correct equation. We've also gone ahead and added these beautiful alias names to all the fields so that you don't have to be a data or ACS expert to access and use these layers. You can immediately just access the data values, and you can immediately get a really well-described description of what that field is going to be showing you. In the past, there's a cumbersome process to join these fields from the census. B 1007 underscore O2E. You have to really understand what that means. And so while the fields are actually still staying true to those census ACS specifications, the alias names we've derived from the census's specs in order to just be a little bit more clear. So it just makes it an easier process when using these layers.
Yeah, so before, if you've seen the alias names from what you get from FactFinder, for example, it'll say population age 5+ : Spanish. And so when it auto-generates a legend in ArcGIS, it's nice if it already is in an English sentence. So all we added was population 5+ who speaks Spanish in the home. So just making it into a full sentence.
Yeah, a little bit easier to understand. A few more things that are value add in here is that, what are all these things? Why is this so important? And it's the fact that, this data that previously was so challenging to access, now you can just immediately add this data into your map and get started with it with something that's already meaningful. Each map already has default cartography and pop-ups to get you started, which you can easily adjust to make whatever map you might need other than what's already being shown. But it adds all three of the geography layers directly into your map, and you can just get started immediately. None of this processing, none of this searching or downloading. You're just, boom, you're there. And one of the huge values that we've added is that because the fact that this data is from the census, this is publicly available data. And so these layers are also publicly available data. So for the GIS community out there that's familiar with the Living Atlas and some of the content within it, these layers in particular do not require any credits or subscription, which means that you can publicly use and share these with very minimal barriers to entry. And so now Diana's gonna, now that we've talked about this a little bit, Diana's gonna give you an intro of how to access these layers in a handful of different ways, such as ArcGIS Online and in Pro. And so I'm gonna go ahead and hand this over to her, and she's gonna get us started on our first demo.
Thanks, Lisa. So here I am at the Living Atlas of the World homepage. I'm going to click on Browse. And you'll see all these familiar categories that Lisa described earlier. We pretty much live in the people category on our team because we're demographic nerds like that. If you're interested in a very specific subset, you can go ahead and narrow it down that way. And at the beginning, you're seeing all different types of ArcGIS Online content items. So that's maps, data layers, scenes, which are 3D, and even different web mapping applications, such as story maps. So let's pretend that I'm interested in that really cool internet connectivity data that the census just released. So I'm going to type internet connectivity in here.
And this is brand new data. I mean, they just released this in December. And so this is, we're making maps out of data that is fresh from the census.
Yeah.
Fresh off the press.
So I only get 6 results here. If I got more, I would narrow it down to just layers, for example. And here you'll see the 2 different layers. We've got one for boundaries and one for centroids that was mentioned by Lisa. We can add these straight to a map viewer if we like, or we can open them and explore the item details page, which I'll go over in a minute. But there are so many other ways to get to the data itself. That was from the Living Atlas website. Now I'm in my own ArcGIS Online account where I'm signed in, and I'm in the Content tab. I see all of my content here. I can check things that I've marked as favorites, things that I have put in a group, organizations work, and then finally this tab, Living Atlas. We see the same familiar categories, same regions, and the same filters by item type. And again, we can search Living Atlas. Maybe this time we're not so much interested in one particular topic. We just want to see all the ACS layers that we're talking about. We can search the phrase current year ACS. And let's narrow it down to just layers. And here you can get a sense of how many layers we've got and what they look like. Another way to access it is within the map viewer itself. Here we're building a map, so we'll click on Add Data. We can search all of ArcGIS Online, where you'll get anything and everything, or you can search the Living Atlas layers, which we recommend. And again, that phrase, current year ACS, or any topic that you're interested in. We can filter again by those categories. Let's see what we get here. This time, since we're already in the map viewer, it knows that we're only going to be interested in layers. We're not interested in web maps, since we're building our own web map. We're not interested in story maps here. There's already contextual intelligence built in. So when we browse the Living Atlas from within the map viewer, we're only going to be shown layers. And if we want to see the details about it, they pop up right in the side panel. Now let me show you how to do this in ArcGIS Pro. Again, it knows that we are within a map, so it's only going to show layers. And we've got the same categories that we know and love. And here, let me type in veterans. And here are our two boundaries and centroids layers. And we can easily add those to our map in Pro. We've also created an ArcGIS content group. If you're using these layers constantly and you just want to bookmark the whole thing and get some information about it, this is the place to do it. We've got a little bit of background information with some links to resources for you guys. And then we've got all the layers here. We have categorized them a little differently. There's some overlap to the Living Atlas categories, but within ArcGIS groups, you can create your own categories. So that's what we've done here. And let's say we're interested in jobs and commuting. We can look at these, and let's open up this one. And now I want to do a deep dive into that item details page that I mentioned. We see what this is about: hours worked, unemployed, and not in labor force. We see what year it is. It's the most recent ACS release, and it'll always be refreshed days after the census has released their new data. We see what tables are in this layer, and there's a whole bunch of links to census documentation and resources. Then we've gone ahead and listed literally every way that Lisa and I touched the data. So for example, we dropped tracts with zero population that are in areas of water. We also changed negative values to null, because when you're mapping and symbolizing, negative values really break your symbology. So we set those to null for you. And we've done the alias names like we described. That's the overview. We can also browse the data itself. This is showing us state, but we can easily see county and tract. This is the table of what this attribute table looks like with these gray alias names here. But say okay, the alias names are nice, but I want to see exactly what ACS table and line these are coming from. Click on the fields view this time, and you'll see the display name is what we've been talking about so far, but the field name remains the same, where we've got the exact ACS table, the line ID, and then whether or not this is an estimate or a margin of error field, shown by E or M. And those pre-calculated fields that Lisa described earlier, those are always denoted, or denoted by the phrase _calc_. And again, they end with E or M for estimate or margin of error. So that's the layers. We've also created a group of example web maps and apps that use these layers. And this is growing every day. We actually invite you to contribute maps and apps to this. And if you want to browse them and get inspiration, feel free to do so. I'm going to show you 3 different maps within here that are actually from the same exact layer. So first we've got male and female disconnected youth. So these are youth 16 to 19 who are not in school and not in the labor force. So they're disconnected, so to speak. This is showing me whether or not there are more males or females who are in this disconnected youth population. And this is showing me Dallas. I've also got a map here of teen employment rate. And the pop-up shows the teen employment rate instead of the disconnected youth. And we've got a chart here that breaks it down by sex. Last, we've got a predominance map of are youth learning, earning, doing both, or doing neither? So are they in school only? That's the dark brown, the majority of counties. Are they learning and earning? So in school and working, those are the pink ones. And then earners only in orange, etc. These 3 maps all come from the same layer. So you may be wondering now how to customize a map and make the web map that you want to make. I'm going to hand it over to Lisa now to describe that for you.
All right, great demo. Quick question, Diana. So the layers of those examples, are those also within the Living Atlas for people to use?
Yes, they are.
Yeah, so that's really useful because a lot of times you can start using already pre-built web maps directly within apps and story maps. If you find one that's already built, you can immediately just start using it. So before you get started on a web map, you might check if it already exists within the Living Atlas or within that group. Otherwise, I'm going to show you guys how to build your own from scratch. So here we're just seeing the ArcGIS Online map viewer. So this is just a blank map. I have no data. I haven't done any data processing on my own. I'm just going to utilize the Living Atlas and create a web map using one of these ACS layers. So again, using that workflow that Diana showed, I go to Add, Browse Living Atlas Layers, and I'm going to search for that phrase that she mentioned, current year ACS. And so when we're saying this, we mean current year because, again, these layers will always be updated. So every time you search this phrase, you'll always be getting these layers, and you'll have confidence that these are going to be containing the most current ACS data. Again, we can see this list that we see before, and we see the boundaries layers are all have thumbnails that have filled in polygons, whereas you'll know it's a centroids not only because it's labeled, but also because the thumbnail will show you that using the point symbol. And so as we scroll through here, we actually see this ACS youth and work activity variables. This is actually the layer that was built behind all the web maps that Diana just showed you. And so if there was a map that you wanted to build on top of those, or you wanted to build your own, this is where you would get started on that.
Yeah, and 2 of those maps I actually built with the 12-16 data, but now when you're seeing them today, they're refreshed and they reflect the 13-17 data because they're calling to these layers that are refreshed.
So you had to do nothing on your part. Your map just suddenly showed the newest data.
Yeah, I mean, I always like to review it after it's been refreshed, but there was really no repeat of work year after year.
Absolutely incredible. Definitely a shift from the existing paradigm. And so, again, if I'm interested in a certain topic, if I'm not familiar with what's in here, I can go into the people category. I can search, see what variables there are and topics there are for income, things like education, learn more about educational attainment by various population, or housing tenure by education, which is actually a really interesting one that I had never heard of before seeing these layers. Thank goodness we have Diana on our team, like I said, the ACS expert. But I'm going to provide a situation where I'd actually be interested in learning just more about the general population in my area. So, for example, if I work for the city of Chicago and I want to learn more about the youth population in my area, I could go to population and immediately just add this population layer. So again, as Diana showed, it's got this full description that we saw on the item description page, and so we can immediately see which tables are used and confirm that the vintage is that newest year. And I can go ahead and add this directly into my map. If I go back to the table of contents, what I'll see is that I have the 3 geography layers. We've got state, we've got county, and we've got tract. But you'll notice these 2 are grayed out. That's the way that the layers are built, so that at any given point, you're just seeing one layer at a time. That way it draws really speedy. But if you wanted to show something at a different scale, you could just change this visibility range and customize it however you'd like. So in this case here, I'm seeing states. And if I zoom in a little bit, I'm going to start seeing counties. Again, we've got this default symbology set at each geography level. I've got the pop-up, and so as I click on it, I know that I'm going to learn more about that topic that's being mapped. But in this case, I want to go ahead and just zoom right into the Chicago area, because that's the area that I'm interested in learning more about. And so right now I'm getting all the tracts in the United States, and I still have states and counties in my map. But really, I'm just interested in making a map about my area. And so I'm going to start by going ahead and just removing the state and the county layers, because ultimately those are just cluttering up my map and I don't need them. And so now I'm just seeing tracts, but I'm still getting all the tracts for the United States. So I can actually just go to this filter button right here and filter this by either state or county. So I can choose the county field just to filter by counties, or I can choose the state field in order to choose a different state. In this case, I want to show the Cook County area, because I know that Chicago is in Cook County. And so I can say I want to know unique values. I could scroll through these, but actually, because I know I'm in Cook County, I can just start to type it, and ArcGIS Online offers me the county that I'm already interested in. So I can just go ahead and choose that and apply my filter to the map. So now I have a more refined map to the area that I'm interested in. And so again, by default, this map is showing me the percentage of the population in dependent age groups. And that is youth population under 18, as well as elderly population, which is 65 plus. And so I want to make a change to this map and explore some of the variables that are in this service already. So I can go to the Change Style button here in order to start mapping something else. I see that that bolded by default, it's that dependent population variable. But if I scroll through here, I actually am going to see a lot of different variables that are in here. And every single one of these variables could be made into a map. And so you can really, the possibilities are endless of the customization that you can do with these layers. In this case, I want to explore some of these pre-calculated percentages. So first, I'll check out the 65 plus to see where the elderly population is in Chicago. Immediately, my map changed and is telling me something different. The pattern is kind of consistent, where the downtown Chicago area doesn't really have that much elderly or youth population. I'm seeing it more in these suburbs outside of the city. But really, I'm interested in knowing where my youth population is, because I know that my mayor would be interested in knowing that. So I can go ahead and choose the less than 18 variable. And again, my map just automatically changes. And again, this is really interesting. Just southwest of the downtown area, we're seeing this pattern of a high amount of youth population. So there must be a lot of families having kids in these suburbs in particular. And so this would be a really interesting map for policymakers if they were interested in reaching the youth population in any way. I want to make a change to this map. I'm not really interested in having this be this purple color anymore, so I can go into the options button to learn more about the distribution of the data as well. I can see the range of data here at the top of this histogram, and then I can learn more about the average value in my county. The average is 22% of the population, that's youth. And these two values right here are actually by default giving me plus or minus 1 standard deviation from this average value. And so this is all built straight into ArcGIS Online so that you're given a statistically significant map right away. And so you can choose to use a national value to center your map, or you can leave the settings as is. In this case, that's what I'm going to go ahead and do. But this is really valuable to be able to adjust and learn more about your data. If you want to use a normal classification method, you simply push this button and can do it that way as well. But I just want to change the color. For example, I think youth is more of a pink color. So I'm going to go ahead and change it to that, just so that it's a little bit aesthetically different. I'll go ahead and save that. And now my map is showing me the percent of population that's less than 18 in the Chicago Cook County area. But the pop-up is still showing me where this dependent population is. So instead of rebuilding a full pop-up, I can actually use the pop-up that was already set on the layer to create my own custom version. So in the layer settings, you go to Configure Pop-up in order to make a change to this. Using this big green button, you click Configure, and this is where you'll see the default pop-up settings. It's telling me some information about the population. These things within the squiggly marks are the fields that are being used to drag the data from the database in the background. And so I'm actually not interested in having this dependent population information. So I'll go ahead and remove that, as well as the 65 plus from my pop-up. I'll go ahead and accept. I also see that there's a pop-up media, which was that table. And if I look at the settings of that, I see that that's male and female population counts. That's not really associated directly with the youth population. So I'm going to go ahead and just remove this to make my pop-up really clean. I click OK to accept it. And now when I click on my map, I have a really clean, concise pop-up about the youth population within each tract in my area. So this would be a really useful thing to share with someone who just needs quick answers and to learn more about their area. So how do I actually now make this my map? Well, all I do is save it. Up at the top, you click the Save button, and this will save this as a brand new map within your content, and you'll have ownership of it, but that it's still calling to those layers in the background. And so I'm going to go ahead and name this Cook County Youth Population, give it a tag youth, ACS, census, some valuable things that will help people search for this. And I'll save this as my own brand new map. But if I wanted to share this with the mayor or someone of importance, they probably aren't interested in all these buttons that are on here, and that wouldn't really mean a lot to them. They'd really just want to see the map and understand it quickly. So we recommend putting things into an application. And that can be done by clicking the Share button up here at the top. So if you click Share and then say Create a Web App, it brings you to the full suite of configurable web apps that you can make with these. So I tend to use the basic viewer because it's a really simple way to share your maps. You get a description of what it is, and you just say Create Web App. What's nice is that by default, they give you the same title that you already used, and so I don't have to retype in all that. So I just click Done, and I'm going to be on my way of creating my new web application. And so what this is doing in the back end is using that brand new web map that I just created, and it's going to create a custom web app for it using that basic viewer application that I chose. And so this is the building environment, which has all sorts of different settings, but for the sake of time, I just want this to show a legend when it shows up. So I'm going to skip all the other options, but I do encourage you to explore them when making your own. But if you go into options, it'll show you all the things that are shown up here by default. So I actually don't want to show any of these things except for the legend tool. I just want the legend to show up on when it opens. So I go to specify active tool at startup and I choose legend. I'm going to save this and immediately see the changes in this preview section of the app. And now I can see that when this is shared, it's not cluttered, it's really simple, it's using that web map that I just created, and I've got the legend up by default. So if I wanted to share this with my boss, all I would have to do is share them this URL, and this is what they would see. And that took me, a handful of minutes to make. And I really encourage you to explore the data, try out new fields, try it out in your area, and definitely look at a lot of the resources that we'll provide to you at the end of this. And on the topic of resources, I'm going to cover some of those right now. A lot of these are all available in the handout that you can see, so feel free to go check these out while I'm describing them. These ones right here are accessing the layers. So this goes over a lot of what Diana's demo already showed. So this is the accessing the layers through the website, accessing them through the group that she showed, and also those example web apps if you wanted to go ahead and use those within your apps or GIS workflows. We've also created this story map that helps give you kind of an intro about the layers and where to find them. And so this is also a really good story if you need a refresher of what we've shown you today. Some additional resources. Diana wrote this wonderful blog that introduces the layers and the data and how to find them. She's also constructed this absolutely incredibly detailed frequently asked questions story map, which is an immense resource if you really want to know the nitty-gritty details about the data. Also, if you were curious about why you would choose boundaries over centroids, those two different versions of the layers, Diana also created this really informative story map that kind of gives some use cases of why you would use one over the other. We also just released a blog that's essentially the demo that I just showed you about making your own map, and it simplifies it into 4 easy steps. So this was just released yesterday. Make a map about your community in 4 steps. That blog is released and on the ArcGIS blogs page. And so please feel free to access all these resources, get started, learn more, really dive into the data because there's a wealth of it and it can be used in so many different ways. On that, we'll go on to questions.
Thank you, Diana and Lisa. You offered some really great insight on how to get started with the data that is available. And I think I see a very clear pathway of how everyone can utilize the ACS layers. So let's actually start answering some of the questions that were sent over to us. If you have questions still lingering, please feel free to utilize the chat window, and then we will continue to collect the questions until the end of this webinar. So one of the questions that came in is, what is the difference between the boundaries and centroids layers?
Ooh, great question. So if you want to make those filled polygon maps that Lisa just showed, you're going to want to use the boundaries layers. That has all the geographic detail of the actual boundaries of the tracts and the counties and states. The centroids, on the other hand, just have one central point that's associated with them. So it has a lot less geographic information, and because of that, it's ever so slightly more performant. It might draw a split second faster, but really the use cases for centroids would be if you're doing any ArcGIS analysis and geoprocessing with these, centroids would probably be your friend.
Awesome, thank you. Another question, are ACS layers credit consuming?
I'll cover that one. As I mentioned before, these ACS layers are, because the data is publicly available through the census, through a government website, that means that this data is also publicly available for anyone. No credits required. So I'll say it again, no credits, yay!
Yeah.
Feel free to just use and share these within your own web maps and apps. Publicly available.
Yeah,
it's publicly available data.
it's not considered premium content. It's not considered subscriber content because it's straight from census.gov.
Awesome. We all love free authoritative content. So one more question for you. Why were the 5-year data estimates used instead of the 1-year data estimates?
Hand that off to Diana.
Okay, so because the census is able to pool across years and create these 5-year estimates, we get really, really detailed fields like the age groups and other fields that you saw with the youth and teen employment. We get those down to the tract level, and really small counties are able to take advantage of that 5 years worth of the survey data. You won't get that with the 1 year. Now you may be asking, well, why did we use the 5-year for states? Isn't 1 year available for states? Yes, it is, but if you're mapping tracts and you want to compare something to states, we strongly recommend you compare apples to apples, and if you're using 5-year for one thing, compare it to 5-year for the other thing. So everything in this entire set of layers is the 5-year ACS data.
Great, thank you. And fantastic, thank you, Lisa and Diana, for taking the time to clarify these questions and also for joining me today to share this information with our community. As noted earlier, a follow-up email will be sent containing a recording of this webinar. If additional assistance is needed, please feel free to reach out to Diana, Lisa, or myself at the contacts provided, and we'd be happy to help you. Additionally, Living Atlas has great resources for you to stay involved. For those of you sharing your maps on Twitter, be sure to follow and tag us at Living Atlas. Join our GeoNet community at ArcGIS Living Atlas of the World to connect with GIS experts, learn best practice, and ask questions. We also have the ArcGIS Living Atlas blog, which is updated often daily with blogs centralized around Esri's extensive content offering, including launch updates, what's new, and how-to articles. And then we have the monthly newsletter, Living Atlas Gems. And I really, if you're excited about data, this is something you'll want to be a part of. We use this newsletter to help keep you up to date with the latest data available in the Living Atlas, new apps, featured use cases, blogs, and learn lessons. Continuing on with our spatial data webinar series, next month we will welcome Esri's Chief Cartographer, Charlie Fry, to talk with us about climate change. Charlie will demonstrate an easy method for applying climate data in ArcGIS Pro to explore the effects of climate change in your neighborhood. Please join us February 19th. A link will be shared in our follow-up email. Thank you all for taking the time today to learn more about the Living Atlas and the American Community Survey data. You now have the resources you need to get started. We will see you again soon for our next webinar, and until then, happy mapping.